every paper currency across the world is nothing more than monopoly money. Yet we're under this grand hallucination like it's actually worth something because, somebody will accept it for, goods and services. But ultimately, when you stand up for monopoly board, that money is worthless. I always say, yeah, it's great if you own your house, but you never really do own it. They're going to ding you for property tax. And if you don't pay it.
Are we worrying about things that are so far beyond our control that there's no point in worrying? Should we just, crack open a couple of cold beers and be like, well, it is what it is. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am delighted to be joined by Jake Galt, author of Break the Stake. Jake, welcome to the show.
Hey Josh, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
looking forward to it.
Not a problem, man. So I came across your website, having seen some stuff you'd written on Twitter, and then I thought you might be quite an interesting person to talk to. So why don't you tell people just a little bit about what Break the Stake is, and why we decided to make a whole website about it, basically.
Yeah, so kind of a long history of finding my way into the ideas behind Break the Stake. It really all started when I started dabbling in the crypto space, kind of in the same vein where you came from, seeing some of the manipulation and odd behaviors in the market. And I realized, in the crypto space, there is this whole idea of a proof of work versus a proof of stake. And as I started digging further into it, I started realizing that kind of the worst of all altcoins or shit coins really was the US dollar, or really any fiat currency, all of which require us to prove our stake to them by taking out more debt, which then tethers us more into the system. They even rate how well we stake ourselves with credit scores. So this is kind of a pervasive idea. And I got to basically the end point that all of what we experience in life, and what I'm now calling the fiat matrix, is, that human behavior is downstream from incentives. The incentives are downstream from money, which is controlled and corrupted centrally in this system. And the only way out of it is to break our stake. And so that's kind of how I got to where I got with the book, and dove into the various aspects of the world as we know it, and in which we exist today that are kind of impacted by that.
Do you want to just explain a little bit more about what you mean about human behavior is downstream from incentives, and then incentives downstream from money? So what human behavior is downstream from incentives, I guess you mean that whatever is easy, pleasurable, profitable, etc., or maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of that, but also Charlie Munger, I think, is famously said, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome." Right. So, ultimately, even code within governments are written to incentivize certain behaviors. So now we're seeing kind of population declines as one example in certain areas. So governments are incentivizing people by providing them more tax credits or benefits for having more children in some cases. So, I say that to say we're all coin operated, right? And yeah, it certainly lends itself to what's pleasurable and what's easy, what's efficient. But, ultimately what I think is, humans are going to act in the way that they're incentivized to act. The way in which humans tend to be incentivized these days is through fiat, limitless currency. Governments all know this. They have total control over it. And so, I think they've pretty well refined their process to control our behavior by controlling those incentives. And it's because they have, like I said, control over that money. The money supply being no longer sound, founded on nothing. They don't even have to print it anymore. They just, hit a couple buttons on a computer, on a keyboard, and quadrillions of fiat currency, units show up on a screen. So because that supply of money and control of the money is so corrupted and manipulated, that's how I think it bleeds down in a cascading, design where the incentives then are manipulated as is, ultimately our behavior.
So you think, well, is the increasing or the decreasing value of our currency is undermining our desire to plan long term, maybe, or like it's maybe stopping us from, or is like encouraging sort of cheap short term thinking because it's impossible to put a long term value on anything? Is that, aside from maybe like hard assets?
I certainly, if the currency that you possess today is without a doubt going to be worth less tomorrow, you have the incentive to deploy it today, whether that be to spend it on something or to put it into a harder asset, which is, in my estimation, why so many of us go through these gyrations, basically to outrun the inflationary impact of a debased, fiat currency across the world. Here in the United States, people are like, oh, well, Jake, why are you so worried about it? Like the dollar's solid. I'm like, well, the dollar's akin to being the tallest midget. That doesn't mean that it's tall. It's just one of the strongest, fiat currencies there is, but ultimately it still has lost 40 or 50% of its total value in the last 4 or 5 years. So, here we are all trying to do whatever we can to avoid this, be it invest in real estate, invest in the market, right? Find these kind of arbitrage situations, just like you've covered on much of, your previous conversations. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, if I've got money today, I know implicitly, inherently, that tomorrow that money is going to be worth less. So I better deploy it in some way, shape, or form. And I think ultimately it kind of goes along with this whole idea of planned obsolescence. Much like everything seems planned to fail. You get your iPhone update and suddenly your 4-year-old iPhone is bricked and you've got to go buy a new one, or insert any example here. We all are aware of them. Money is essentially the same thing. And yeah, they incentivize us to go spend it, with the eventuality, put my conspiracy theorist hat on, being that, these central bank digital currencies that nation states are so eagerly rolling out, they're literally just going to plan your money to expire, right? Use it or lose it by next month, and they'll be able to incentivize, whatever outcomes they want from a GDP perspective. Just because, if you don't use that money to go buy something and prop up their figures, you're going to lose it anyways.
Yeah, there's a great quote I need to look up right now, from a central banker talking about that planned obsolescence of money, the programmable aspect of it. But so you're someone who's clearly like very plugged into the debasement of currency discussions. To you worried about our endless printing of money, increasing of debt, just making a lot of the assets or the money that we have on hand to be increasingly worthless, and then leave us poor. Possibly some economic crash comes along, then the super rich buy everything up. There's many awful dystopian scenarios you could think up in your head, but like as I am, we're both like very plugged into this, right? How do you think this affects people who aren't plugged into it? So you've talked about how it's like seeping into our whole culture. How is this like affecting the mindset of people who don't pay any attention to this stuff whatsoever? Like, I don't know if you know the show Love Island. It's really big in the UK, and I've
seen a bunch of it flying around on X these days.
Yeah, I can thankfully say I have never seen an episode. I've seen like I think 1 or 2 clips from it, right? And one of the clips was like people discussing Brexit. And they were talking about it like, oh, no, we're going to leave the European Union. They're like, there was this entire discussion about what it meant for, the people. Someone was trying to explain what Brexit is and how they didn't know, having lived in this country for, during the time it was going on, because that was the only thing anyone ever talked about for years. And and this girl just couldn't even wrap her head around what it meant, like what it was, like what this thing that everyone discussed was. Like how is the debasement of currency like affecting those people's mindset, basically?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you've struck one of the key points of my book, Break the Stake, where I actually started off by talking about the Reds versus the Blues. I see you're You're a red. I see your kit in the background there for Liverpool.
Oh yeah.
And I actually talk about how at one point I went through induction. I worked for a UK based company, and I went to a Manchester United game, and it was an incredible atmosphere. But I use that as an example of the red versus blue as a distraction, right? Red versus blue in sport, just like in politics, just like everywhere else. Basically, the Fiat matrix has plenty of opportunities for us to distract ourselves, be it Love Island or any variety of other things that they give us to focus on other than what might be an important conversation. Because, dare we enter into those waters, then you end up on a podcast talking to each other about the worst, most dystopian outcomes possible. But I think this is a feature of the matrix, not a bug, right? They want us distracted. And then when you start paying attention, they want you paying attention to what they want you paying attention to. And then we just become like, a jar of ants where they're shaking the jar and we're fighting with each other about nonsense instead of fighting with whoever the invisible hand is shaking the jar.
Yeah.
Everyone's already agitated because, to your point, they're stealing from us, right? I mean, I think instead of just debasing currency, like, look, the one thing that we have as sovereign individuals that is finite, truly finite and scarce is our time. And here we are going through the matrix, exchanging this perfectly precious asset for paper money that's like monopoly money, literally. It's the worst trade in the history of trades. We're trading something which is, like I said, perfectly finite for an infinite paper money. Of course we're agitated. We're storing our life energy into this thing, which sucks. And then when they print twice as much of it, they are literally stealing the life energy that is our only scarce asset, right? So we're already agitated. To your point, many people don't even know why. Of course, you're on a treadmill and they keep ratcheting up the speed and the pitch over, slow enough, right? Even slow enough, you'll eventually recognize, holy shit, like I can't breathe and I can't keep up with the treadmill. Like that's eventually what happens. So even when people aren't paying attention, they know they're agitated and pissed. They know they can't buy eggs or milk like they used to. They know that, like, my dad used to be able to buy, a sports car for $3,000 that now costs $120,000. It's like, and it's not because people are greedy necessarily, like the manufacturers, right? It's the fact that, like, the money itself in the last 100 years, US dollars have lost 3% of their value in the last 100 years. That's like the worst performing shit coin there is. It's literally fundamentally worse than Dogecoin, like the US dollar. It's nuts. And yet we're all like, kind of blind to it unless we're paying attention, to your point.
It is worrying that people aren't paying attention at the same time. I mean, it does concern me. But then there's the other side of me that just thinks about there's this online trend. I don't know if it's Instagram or something like that, but there's this online trend basically that goes, it's people taking a video of like them watching the sunset, or just being out for a walk in the park, or cooking some food and having a nice time with some friends, and it's like, I almost forgot this is the whole point. And sometimes I wonder, are we worrying about things that are so far beyond our control that there's no point in worrying? Should we just crack open a couple of cold beers and be like, well, it is what it is,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two schools of thought there. One is like certainly touching grass, smelling a sea breeze, all of those things. You hope we're not already in a simulation like Elon Musk has said, because then that would just be a really interesting part of the code. But yeah, I mean, look, I love getting outside, getting off devices, beyond the currency stuff. Really what I think it boils down to is third-party manipulation, right? Whether it's currency or AI, obviously, they don't even know what it's doing to us to get us to just constantly have face on screens. It's just programmed to have us be eyes on screens. I think, one, you could just say, hey, this is out of my control. I'm just going to enjoy the ride while I'm here. Ultimately, that's all good and fine until that planned obsolescence goes so far that like you can't even keep up with the property taxes to maintain your home here in the United States. Like I always say, yeah, it's great if you own your house, but you never really do own it. They're going to ding you for property tax. And if you don't pay it, they're coming to take your house. Right. So, I mean, at some point you got to feed yourself. You got to pay somehow for a dwelling or for gas to get around. Like when those things become so punitive, you're left without an option but to be like, what is going on here? Like, and for me, as much as I seem worked up about, this third party risk over our currency and therefore over our behavior, I feel like I have found the answer for me anyways in, a currency that is not controlled by any third party centrally, and one that can't be corrupted and printed infinitely in Bitcoin. And that gives me actually the warm fuzzies where I'm like, hey, no amount of voting is going to get me out of this red versus blue dynamic. They're just two wings of the same bird, right? I'm just voting for more printing of money, no matter who is in there, right? So I actually feel like by opting out and breaking my stake, I'm doing the one thing that will allow me to truly appreciate going outside and running my hands through grass or feeling a good breeze or, watching a sunset. Like, when I have something that I feel like is sound that whoever they is, cannot manipulate, I feel like that becomes something that you can focus more on, not less.
So obviously you're talking about Bitcoin, but I wanted to go back just a little bit to the discoupling of gold from the dollar, because a lot of people obviously point at this. The What Happened in 1971 website is phenomenal, which I will get up actually while I'm talking. But
basically, when the U.S. first defaulted on the global currency peg, we defaulted against the world.
So I guess I was hoping like I could get your take on what happened then and why it was so important.
Yeah, I mean, what happened then was it's an inevitability when you give any third party control over money. In fact, this was in no way new. When the first kind of paper gold-backed currency existed, I don't know if you know this, but it was actually goldsmiths, right? So goldsmiths had, once upon a time, the safest storage of gold, right? And if you and I were in a town and I wanted to transact with you for your goods or services, I had two options. I could either go to the goldsmith, take my gold receipts to them and say, can you please give me my gold? At which point they'd give it to me. I'd come to you. I'd hand you however much gold you needed. You would then take said gold back to the blacksmith or goldsmith, deposit it. They would give you a receipt as well. Well, we wisened up as humans, and I would just give you the receipt from the goldsmith. That way I didn't have to go and you didn't have, but we trusted that the gold was there. Well, spoiler alert, this was the first instance of breaking the gold backing to a paper currency when the goldsmiths started issuing more receipts than they had gold deposits on hand to satisfy. Now, if you do that little by little, you and I out here in the world don't know that. We still think we're transacting with these receipts and that they're sound because we could go redeem gold for them. But lo and behold, blacksmiths or goldsmiths do this enough and people are wising up. They're like, wait, something smells off. Boom. First bank runs in the history of bank runs, but it was goldsmiths. Fast forward, right? The government comes in and says, hey, these goldsmiths are not to be trusted. We can be trusted, however. Just give us all the gold stores. We'll issue you receipts just like the goldsmiths did back in the day that can be redeemed for gold. But they did the exact same thing that goldsmiths did. They had too many things that they wanted to fund. They wanted to derive certain behaviors and provide incentives for them. But how do you get around that when you don't have the gold reserves to do it? Well, you just issue more money and you disregard the peg. Like I said off the top, this is tantamount to defaulting, right? We had a contract with the world that everyone could peg their currency to the U.S. currency because the U.S. currency was pegged to something sound. If you look at the history of the value of a US dollar since 1971, I mean, you want to talk about gasoline on a fire. It was already starting to erode ever since, frankly, 1913, when the creature was born on Jekyll Island in the Fed. But outside of that, it's been like throwing gasoline on a fire. And, now it's like I said, it's meant that every paper currency across the world is nothing more than monopoly money. Yet we're under this grand hallucination like it's actually worth something because, somebody will accept it for, goods and services. But ultimately, when you stand up for monopoly board, that money is worthless. It's the same thing as fiat. It's just we're under a mass hallucination.
I mean, you could say that we are still in that game. Our tokens are still, transactable whilst we exist within the global.
Absolutely. But Josh, I would say this, like, at least in cryptocurrency world, right? These projects, these Web3 projects have to publish. This is the amount of outstanding tokens. This is the total possible volume of tokens. This is the issuance schedule. This is how, if you stake them, blah, blah, whatever the rules of their tokenomics are. If the United States was forced to do that for fiat, or insert any country here, it would literally be the worst altcoin project and no one would buy it. Dogecoin has better tokenomics than the US dollar, right? Here we go. The US dollar coin, infinite possible supply, 96% of it owned by 5% of the holders, right? We can issue however much we want, whenever we want. You have to stake yourself to it by taking on debt. And if you default, good fucking luck. I mean, literally, it's the worst of the worst, right? But the government doesn't have to do that. And here we are just like participating, right? Again, this is why I call it the Matrix, right? To your point, we're still very much in this. I pay my mortgage, right, in US dollars, right? As much as I'd love to live on a Bitcoin standard, frankly, I don't mind paying fiat for things because, I mean, there's this idea of Gresham's law, if you've ever heard of it. Gresham's law is basically that if there are two types of currencies, right, people are going to spend the worse or the weaker of them because they'd rather save the better, right? And this happened over time throughout the millennia, right? I mean, at one point, we transacted in beads or salt or copper or silver, right? During those transition periods, if you and I were transacting in beads, but suddenly copper or silver shows up and you're still accepting beads, I'm like, bro, I'm going to pay you beads because I'm going to keep the silver, right? So yeah, I mean, we're going to be straddling it for a while. And I'm not one of these who thinks the dollar is going to implode anytime soon. Like I said, it's the tallest midget. It doesn't make it tall, but it's the strongest of the weak. And candidly, this is why I think the governments of the world are going after these stablecoin legislation packages, like in the United States specifically, because, as the dollar loses its dominance, certainly through the petrodollar being threatened, with BRICS countries specifically saying, hey, why do we need US dollars to transact when we could use Bitcoin or whatever else? The US government needed a way to maintain its hegemony and its dominance. And what better way to do that than to tether all of crypto and or Bitcoin via stable coins to the US dollar?
Okay, so that's what you think they're doing with the stable coins.
Absolutely. I mean, it's twofold, right? One is they can use compliance as a backdoor to do centralized currencies, centralized digital bank currencies, so they can program the money, track you, control you. But also, the United States, if it loses its dollar dominance by way of the petrodollar, it's now lost its ability to distribute the inflationary impacts of the infinite money printing across the world, which it has done since, oh, by the way, 1971. It's not long after we broke the dollar peg that we secured an agreement with Saudis to say, hey, we'll use our super powerful Navy. We'll give you safe rite of passage to distribute your oil all over the place. One caveat: you have to transact your oil transactions in US dollars. that helped us maintain that dominance despite having just defaulted against the world. Fast forward, we're losing that dominance of the petrodollar because people don't have to pay attention anymore to transacting with the US dollar. They can use Bitcoin or whatever. And, the US government's recognizing this. There's definitely a reason they prioritized the Genius Act, which in the United States, all legislation, you should assume that it's the opposite of what it's called, right? The Inflation Reduction Act printed 40% of the currency in circulation right now. It did anything but reduce inflation. So my working assumption here is that the Genius Act is anything but. And, certainly my suspicion is that this allows the US dollar to maintain its dominance globally, because now the biggest on-ramps and off-ramps into the crypto space will be this kind of legitimized stablecoin space because the US government has blessed it.
So would your preferred outcome of all of the discussions going on with the Trump administration, who want, they're talking about some sort of digital asset reserve. Obviously, all the Bitcoiners voted hoping that there would be a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Obviously, they wouldn't announce that 18 months out. That would be, just an insane decision. But is your hope like that Bitcoin would be either the sole part or a major part of that digital asset reserve, and that would form a base layer for like digital financial transactions going forwards?
The fact that you've got nation states, sovereign funds, corporate treasuries, and the like all coming in, and the big boys now are kind of in the Bitcoin space. That makes a lot of folks who were more cypherpunk, minded a little nervous. But the whole idea of Bitcoin specifically is it's for you and it's for your enemies, right? We don't have to agree, but if we agree on these rules, this thing can exist as an algorithm. It's just math, it's math and energy, right? We can agree that those things are pure and sound. So we don't necessarily, which is why, again, the BRICS countries can agree to transact in it, because one doesn't have to trust the other. They all just trust this thing, right? So, ultimately, am I eager for nation states to kind of throw their weight around? Certainly not. I'm libertarian minded, and I think third party risk is the worst in all facets of life. That's kind of essentially my thesis of the book. But I encourage everyone who wants the soundest financial foundation, to hold something that can't be corrupted and printed into infinity. Because again, going back to math, if you have something that's finite divided by something that's going to zero, which all of fiat currency is, math just says it goes to infinity, right? So what does that mean? I don't know. At some point, I think you'll just be transacting in how much something costs in Satoshis versus this Satoshi is worth this many dollars, right? We're not going to be doing those calculations anymore. I would, if the government wants to get a hold of this $37 trillion in debt, which, really is actually more like 74 if you look at all of what they already have line of sight to with Social Security and Medicare, unfunded liabilities. If you look at what's already there, it's already in the 70s in terms of the trillions of dollars of debt. That is a feature, not a bug, a fiat. And the only way the government has any chance in not being steamrolled by that or totally drowned out by it is, in my opinion, adding Bitcoin to their strategic reserve, and that being a key part of it. Obviously, there's going to be some diversification, and they're going to do what they're going to do. But like everyone's portfolio who dabbles heavily in crypto, if you have Bitcoin and other coins, almost universally over time, the Bitcoin becomes a larger part of your overarching portfolio, just because it continues to, become more and more dominant. And that's the journey of most Bitcoiners is, they shitcoin for a while and then they're like, oh, wait, maybe Fartcoin isn't the best idea. Maybe I should do something more sound like Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, we've all been burnt by the occasional being like, no, this is the meme coin for this is going to do 1,000x.
No, Jizz coin's going to be the best. It's like, oh God. Oh,
I mean, I don't know how people didn't see the scams coming. Honestly, I feel like if you got
no.
scammed by a meme coin, like you deserve to have lost that money. Um,
I don't disagree with you. I mean, look, Bitcoin has historically been guilty by association too, because for those who aren't in the space, they associate them all as crypto, then in one big basket.
yeah,
Again, with the thesis of my book, you have a proof of work. And this goes back to, everyday life. Like, there is no easy pill to get fit, right? Yeah, there's Ozempic and there's whatever else, which, by the way, just makes you stake yourself to it for life. Go figure. You have to work. You have to eat healthier and work hard and lift heavy stuff, right? Anything worth achieving is proof of work. Proof of stake was built to be more efficient and to get around that hard work, right? But inevitably, this is a path that, of good intentions that leads you to hell, or at least a much worse off existence, right? And so that's all of these altcoins. Like, I think some of them, had some valid ideas where they thought Web3 is going to take over, and maybe it does. Like, it's like asking which company won as the internet company. Well, if you invested in, Yahoo or whatever back in the day, you probably did a hell of a good job, even though, at this point it's Google or Alphabet or Meta or whatever, right? There is no one thing that wins it all. But I do think from what a cryptocurrency is meant to do, it's two different things. One is tokenizing the participation in Web3, which is kind of the altcoin closer to the shitcoin or scams. And then you have this other thing, which is a store of value that's predicated upon work, which can't be bastardized. And I think there's room for both. I just think they're solving for two different problems, and they're all guilt by association when it comes to the scammers. And
so, do you? Sorry. Would you advocate for like a return to the gold standard?
Certainly. I mean, the problem I see in returning to the gold standard is you're still relying upon third party for safe storage of gold. And in doing so, you inevitably find yourself back at the goldsmith example. This is the reason why I balk at the idea that Bitcoin is somehow digital gold or gold is physical Bitcoin or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen you argue about this. Do you want to explain to people why? Because I've had a number of people on who have discussed Bitcoin as digital gold. People see it as the future of currency transactions. I've had people talk about it as more akin to a central bank, as like a base layer for potential other financial systems to be built on top of it. Like, why is it not digital gold, and what comparison would you make to anything that we have? Or maybe there isn't anything that fits.
I don't think there is. I think it's as close as you can come to making it kind of a tangible parallel or metaphor for people. So I don't poo-poo it altogether. Like, it's as close as we can get to making it relatable for people who do understand gold and don't understand Bitcoin. So I'll grant that. My whole premise is the limitations of gold, namely safe storage of gold, safe transport of gold, and divisibility, right? Because if I have a brick of gold and the shit hits the fan, like, what good is it going to be actually? Like, you have a bunch of goods and we're in the dystopian eventuality, right? Am I shaving off, right, gold shavings, and how much for you, right? And how, like, the whole thing just doesn't make any sense. And so these limitations of gold were literally what gave rise to fiat in the first place. These receipts that we were talking about before. So would I love us to go back to a gold standard? Sure. Who's going to house the gold? The same people right now who promised us an audit of Fort Knox, who still have yet to deliver on that.
Where's the audit? I want the
Where's
audit.
The audit.
I want to know. Like,
the people talking about auditing it now are the quietest ones about it. It's like they got read in to the fact that maybe there is no gold, or I don't know. Like, we're just left here to speculate. It should be easy enough. Snap a picture of the pallets and pallets and pallets of gold, right? Conversely, Bitcoin is audited every 10 minutes. Every time there's a block added to the chain, and I run both Bitcoin miners and a node. I'm helping to codify the next block, and I'm checking as a node runner. All of the blocks are legit. So, like, literally, you have real-time auditing, you have infinite divisibility, you have immutability, and you have absolutely finite supply, which, by the way, that's another thing with gold. I just heard that an asteroid has like, a quadrillion, bazillion pounds of gold on it. It's for ounces. And I'm like, oh, so like, what happens if like that actually is harvested?
Yeah.
Like, what?
I mean,
gold to eat?
yeah, we don't even
Gold won't even be worth any. It's worth something because the stock to flow ratio is so low, right?
yeah.
And yet,
I mean, I
an
find
asteroid with
yeah, an asteroid would change things. I find this this list of, or well, I ChatGPT, the largest gold deposits, mines found or developed in the 21st century. So there's Sukhoi Log in Russia is reserves of over 40 million ounces of gold and one of the largest untapped gold deposits in the world. Uzbekistan has somewhere called Muruntau mine, which is over 170 million ounces, although estimates vary. Papua New Guinea has over 40 million untapped. And then there's some other ones they found. And I saw recently, I've seen like stories about other countries have finding massive gold deposits. I always wondered why gold? Why do you think it was like just it's shiny metal?
Yeah, and initially there were use cases for whether it be ornamental or actual physical use cases, but in doing the research for Break the Stake, like it was just a better, sounder money, right? It was a harder, more durable metal. When you look at the stock to flow, which is how much gold exists in circulation versus how much is being mined from these places, it provided the least amount of more coming into the stock each year. It's about 1 or 2%, give or take, right? So it kind of had this perfect kind of scarcity and durability. It actually met most of what we needed for a sound exchange of value and store of value. The problem was the things that it lacked are what gave rise to the paper representations of gold, which then eventually always just leads back to fiat. It just will. And so this is why I draw such a distinction. I'm like, yes, as close as we can get to what gold was, which is basically just saying satisfying the various properties that we look for in a sound store of value and a good means of transaction. Yes, in that regard, Bitcoin is a digital representation of that. It ain't gold though, because it is far superior in all of the ways that gold is utterly lacking, which were the reasons why we found ourselves in a fiat matrix in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I do wonder what would happen if that asteroid crashed, or if any asteroid mining happens. I mean, the crash would probably be quite significant. Hopefully mining more than it crashing into Earth. That would be good.
Right. Yeah, that would certainly be a far more preferable situation. Yeah. Of course, again, I'd be interested to see what happens if suddenly you see these people like in the comments on X, right? Oh, there's 1 trillion ounces of gold. Everyone would be a billionaire. And it's like, you don't understand. Like, it just wouldn't be worth what it's worth. Like, to your point about the people who can't define Brexit, it's like, no, you don't even know how this works. Like,
I mean, we'd all have lots of shiny gold.
Yeah, and it'd be worthless, Yeah.
I mean, it's if asteroid mining was real easy, the Anunnaki would have done it to fix their atmosphere instead of Earth and seeding early human populations.
Now we're getting into some real fun stuff. I'm with you on all this stuff, man. I started going deep, getting into frequencies and the Anunnaki. Yeah, soul. Anyways, I've got some pretty deep friends who are into some, all the energies. And when I start reading some of that stuff, I'm kind of thinking like, man, how can it not be legit with just, I don't know. Would it even be the craziest thing, in 2025? I mean, UFOs are suddenly real and, no one's batting an eye. It's like, well, duh, of course they are. No.
I still think people don't think that they're real. I'm also not convinced that they're from another planet. I think they're here, and I think there's a fair chance that most of the things we're seeing are ours.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. Yeah. I think it could either, it could even be other dimensional. I don't know if you saw recently the I think it was Google's quantum computer allegedly solved that impossible to solve whatever it was that
Yeah.
was supposed to take 10 septillion years or something, and it did it in 5 minutes by going
Yeah.
multi-dimensional
Yeah,
and coordinating with itself. I'm like, what?
they say that. I'm also super skeptical of like, yeah, talk to other versions of it in the multiverse. I'm just like,
Yeah,
did
I
it?
know.
Is it just a really good
Right.
computer? Like, do you know?
Well, it's good to be skeptical. It's always good to be skeptical.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very cynical. I'd love to go back to talk to like early podcast Josh. He was so much more willing to. He was so much less cynical than the current iteration.
Just bright-eyed and
Yeah,
bushy-tailed and eager.
yeah. Not that I'm not still eager. I still love doing it. It's just
Sure.
a lot more cynical. I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you something else about break the stake. So hang on, let me get the notes up. Yeah, so essentially we're stuck in this thing where we're losing value on our money every year, and it's driving people insane. I think. I mean, I'd say there's a fair chance that that's why the world is becoming increasingly crazy, because people are becoming increasingly desperate.
I agree.
I feel like there would not be, for example, the level of like animosity in the discussion about immigration if we weren't struggling as like a baseline for society. Like if we weren't in the United Kingdom, at least, if there wasn't a lot of people like stuck at zero and scraping along, there'd be a lot less anger towards asylum seekers, basically, because they'd be like, oh, it's okay, well, we have stuff, it's fine. You know, there wouldn't be as I think as a lot of the resentment comes from people just getting mad at seeing someone else get help when they feel like they're more entitled to it. And
yeah, you know, I totally agree with you. First off, you know, the desperation or hopelessness caused by this never-ending kind of treadmill that we're all on, that we eventually won't be able to outrun. You know, I do think leads to a lot of the angst. I mean, but you know, if you go even a step deeper of what we are subjected to in the fiat matrix, right? You know, the control over the money leads to, as one example, war being profitable, right? We wouldn't be in forever war if it wasn't profitable, right? Because why? Just we, you know, want to go kill people. Like who wants to just go, you know, like maybe there are some people like whatever.
There's definitely some
but
people.
you know, we have been in a global war for like what 30 years now or whatever. I mean, it's just nuts. And if you imagine having to pay for these wars, not just with blood, right, but in something which is actually finite, like Bitcoin, governments and nation states just wouldn't be able to wage war. What are they going to do? Come tax the people holding that currency? Like, hey, there's this faraway place and we're going to go bomb the shit out of them. And like, it's for your good, because why? Like, this is why every poll now is like, everyone is against war. And yet here we go. It's just over and over. Healthcare is the same thing, man. Healthcare is 20% almost. I think it's 17 and change of the United States' GDP. So can the market even withstand it if, let's say, I don't know, Americans got healthy? It would tank the market.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's probably why people hate RFK so much. He's trying to put a stop to the gravy train. Whether it'll be successful is a...
I mean, yeah, think about it. A guy trying to get red 40 and yellow 20 and whatever else is, by the way, already illegal in your backyard, but is just rampant in the food in America. I don't know if you've probably seen this, where Americans who are, you know, gluten intolerant and whatever, they go to Italy for 2 weeks and they're like, all I did was eat bread and pasta and I lost 20 pounds. Like, what? Right? It's like, well, yeah, because our food isn't fucking food. Okay. And I guess I say all that to say, to your previous point about people being just riled up and angry. I mean, the system literally is rigged such that we are made to be sick with our food. because they need us not so sick that we die, unless, jabs or whatever in 2020. Not so sick that we die, but just sick enough to like need perpetual ongoing medication, because that makes us staked further to the system. Now we're like physically staked with our bodies and our health, right? And oh, by the way, side effect for the market, it's like 20% of the GDP of the country, right? So like when you're in a system that is incentivized to make you unhealthy and to go to war and to just distract you along the way with red versus blue, right? Like, of course people are pissed off. Like the great noticing is happening that this is fucked. You know what I mean? Like you can, and this is why I wrote the book, because like whether or not people agreed with me that Bitcoin, most people are scared of it, or they haven't, dove in, or any variety of reasons why they don't hold Bitcoin. But what I kept finding was like everyone could agree that we are FUBAR. Like this whole matrix is nuts. When war is profitable and our decreasing health is profitable, and planned obsolescence where we have to buy new crap every 5 years. My grandma had a refrigerator that probably is still running in a dump somewhere because that thing was a tank. Now the refrigerator, has a touch screen on the front, but 4 years later, you got to replace it. And oh, by the way, it's $4,000. It's like, what are we doing, dude? Like this whole thing is nuts. So, people seem to be able to agree. And I think ultimately that's why, in addition to what you're saying, right? They have had enough life energy stolen. The pitch and speed of the treadmill is such that they can't even keep up. And then you have asylum seekers. Again, that's just more ants in the jar, right? It's not that the ants have any problem with it. We're just all being shaken up and, made to fight with each other as opposed to the hand.
Yeah. Yeah. I think more people are seeing it. The problem is, what happens is, and I fear this will happen in the UK, and I fear this is what we're watching happen in America. Like someone comes along who's not the system, like Trump. In our case, we have Nigel Farage, whose party have been polling ahead of every other party in the United Kingdom for months now.
Who, by the way, I just met at the Bitcoin conference and spoke to.
Farage, no way.
Yeah, if you go on my X, I posted it. One of my buddies got a picture, and I was like, oh my! I stepped in front of him to say what's up, and his bodyguard almost got me. And I was like, hey, dude, I just want to talk to you. And honestly, I said, look, man, I love what you've put yourself out there. And I mean, he's been debanked, right? We haven't even talked about this. The fact that they can just be like, hey, Josh, you have wrongthink, like you don't have your money anymore. It's like, what? So it never was. Right. So I was talking to Nigel, and it was amazing. Like, and at one point I said, look, I'm outspoken. I've had friends suggest that I run. And I told him, I was like, I don't want my family to get eviscerated because I think the machine would eviscerate me. And he's like, look, the only way that evil prevails is for good men to do nothing. And I was like, damn it, Nigel. So, I kind of feel like finishing the book, socializing my thoughts about it, and kind of starting here is one step. I don't know that I'll ever necessarily jump in, because honestly, I think, again, I've said it's two wings of the same bird. At one point you can't revive a rotten corpse. And this is why I feel like my only vote is with Bitcoin, because ultimately, like, no matter how good your intentions are when you get in, inevitably, look at what just happened. You mentioned Trump. Kind of weird that, just yesterday, I think it was, or 2 days ago, apparently Epstein trafficked children to approximately no one. Yeah. And Ghislaine Maxwell is still in jail for trafficking children to no one.
Yeah.
Because it's a big, crazy club.
I think the argument is that she trafficked them to him solely and exclusively, and that was it. That's the line.
We'll go with that.
Yeah, and Pam Bondi had the files on her desk, but they don't exist. And the FBI had the videos, but they don't exist. And they were totally ready to release the list, but actually, why are you still talking about it? So yeah, this is basically what I fear
here.
Yeah, and there was I was very interested to see what Elon Musk would do with Doge, and he came in and they went straight past all the really obvious stuff, and came out with not very much in the end. Ultimately, and
well, what's interesting about that is I agree with you. I was very hopeful, and then I realized he is approaching Doge and the government as something is broken, when in fact it's working just as designed. And the idea is fiat, if you think of it as, the worst altcoin out there, the minting of new coins is debt. This is how all dollars come into existence, is by way of some debt instrument, right?
Yeah.
Well, they are most certainly not going to contract the amount of debt. In fact, by definition, they have to continue, right? This is, Lynn Alden has famously made this a meme. Nothing stops this train. Well, it's because the train is running as it's designed to run. It's not because it's in a breakaway and the brakes are being halted. No, this thing is doing what it's supposed to do. And I think Elon finally was like, he probably realized why fight on the beach when the wave of AI and automation is going to change a lot of these financial models. But B, I think he's probably realizing, like, look, these are features, not bugs. Like, I'm trying to fix this thing, which actually isn't broken. It just seems broken to all of us because up is down and left is right, for all the reasons you and I have already talked about.
Yeah, well, they don't tell us their real like, they don't tell us the actual goals of the programs, right. Unfortunately. I think that's right. The problem. The incentives are misaligned. Like they said, this is for this thing, but it's really not for this thing at all. That's the biggest problem. And therefore,
half the time, I think they don't even know. There are these programs, right, that just are, all this money is slushing around, and I don't even think the government, frankly, has eyes on. I mean, back to my auditing days, if you get involved in any kind of, public, there's supposed to be all this scrutiny and whatever else. Like, look at USAID. I mean, that was just billions of dollars flowing for seemingly who the hell knows, right? It's just nuts.
If anyone wants to know, this is the book, The Racket by Matt Kennard. That and Silent Coup, both by the same guy. No one has ever put it better. No one has ever actually explained it. Like, he goes and walks you through how USAID was used for corruption.
Okay.
Yeah, like across the globe.
Put that on my in my Amazon cart now.
Yeah, he's one of the most like fearless reporters, and he is just a really nice guy as well. I've interviewed him twice. He gave me this copy actually, because
nice.
It was the second edition, and I had him on to talk about Silent Coup, which I'd read, and then I had him back on because I saw him posting about this being new out, and I hadn't read it, and he gave it to me, and then I didn't read it for like 6 months, and then I read it in like a week and a half, and it's because I just
awesome.
Just ate it up. I was like, hang on, someone's actually explained this shit, like what. If I got any bookmarks, I probably do.
And I mean, look, to your previous point about Trump or Nigel Farage or outsiders, I think, again, people may have the best of intentions, and maybe not, in some cases, whatever. But frankly, I don't think it really matters. I think they run up against the buzzsaw that is a massively entrenched global operation. I mean, you could start getting into the IMF and the World Bank and the Fed, which is neither federal nor does it have reserves, right? This is a thing I say in my book often. The Federal Reserve is neither federal nor does it have reserves, right? Like, again, this is like Orwellian, where they control speech and make the name things the opposite of what they are. It's like it's so crazy, which is, again, Genius Act, Inflation Reduction Act, all of those things.
All of them.
I think ultimately, even those with the best intentions or outsiders who think they can impact change are missing the point. And that's not that maybe that it needs change, but it's not change to fix anything. They run up against the fact that this thing is doing what it's meant to do, and that's print more money and control the outcomes by managing and manipulating the money.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're gonna have to leave it on that note because I have to go and take the dog for a walk and get in some shade somewhere because he looks very warm. So I'm gonna.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, man, me too. People can find your stuff at breakthestake.com. I will put the link in the description below. But is there anything else you want to plug?
No, I think we covered some pretty good ground. We can, get as deep on or as wide on a lot of these things. So I just appreciate being able to chat through it. And I love it when other people, as much as it might make us a little more cynical, once you start noticing, it's like a bell that you can't unring. Right. And I just hope that Break the Stake helps to illuminate, not why Bitcoin. There's plenty of books that do that, but why not fiat currency and all of the things that ultimately lead to it just being, the matrix that we had talked about before. So hopefully it helps to, open some eyes for some folks, or at least shed light on it in a way that maybe people haven't considered. So.
Well, yeah, I certainly enjoyed reading through some of it, so I'm sure other people will. Yeah, man, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Josh.
Real quick, do you ever find yourself sitting watching the stock market like this? Well, now you could instead be ordering my book like this. It's the story of GameStop. You can purchase it with a hoodie, with acknowledgements, or just with the early backers edition. It's all about the GameStop story. It's the real story, not just what you've seen on films. It's exactly what has happened over the last 3.5 years. And with DFE back, I'm finally able to draw a conclusion to my book. Please pre-order it. It really helps me out. And you will get it eventually, I promise. Hopefully this year.